Shalom, everyone. This is the Jewish community of Sedona and the Verde Valley. I'm Rabbi Alicia Magal, and I wanted to welcome our guest, my friend, my study buddy, my colleague, my dance partner, Rabbi Tamima Itzkowitz. She's a scholar, a translator, a ritual artist. She founded this wonderful group called Holistic Jew, and you can look her up on her website, holisticjew.org. She is so involved with the environment and committed to bringing Jewish tradition in many areas into contemporary understanding. And today the topic is about customs surrounding dying and death and mourning, but in a very beautiful and alive way, if I could say that. So you should see her garden. She's got a green thumb, and she lives in Santa Monica, California, and sometimes she just has a whole dinner from the produce in her terrace garden. It's just so beautiful.
My favorite thing.
Yes. Tamima is really a Kabbalist, and she teaches something called Continuum Movement Liquid Kabbalah. It's not to be believed. It's just beautiful. So besides the class today and on Tuesday, I suggest you look her up, and perhaps you'll be taking other classes with her or looking at some of her beautiful printed materials. Tamima, welcome. How are you feeling today?
Baruch Hashem, I'm good. I'm really glad to be here.
Wonderful.
So what I'd like to do before we get started is let's hold some energy and let's do a bracha together. Let's set an intention. And really the intention for doing any mitzvah is to unite, or a good intention, you can have lots of intentions, but to unite heaven and earth, to bring God to earth and bring earth closer to God. And the classical words to invoke that are L'shem yichud kutsha brichu shchinte, for the sake of union of the Holy One of blessing with Shechina, with love and on love. Here we come together to unite the holy realms of Yud-He, spirit and intellect, and weave them into Vav-He, emotion and action, in total union in the name of all. Here where we are ready and prepared, la'asok b'divrei Torah, to work with the words of Torah. Vayehi noam Adonai Eloheinu aleinu, maseh yadenu, konena aleinu, umaseh yadenu konenehu. May the ease and comfort of God who is, was, and will be rest upon us. May the actions of our hands direct that pleasantness to us, and may the actions of our hands direct that pleasantness to the one. And join me in the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzifanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen. That pushes the enter button and sends it on high. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about my background in end-of-life work, and really share that my parents both passed away over 30 years ago. So I was a young woman at the time, and I remember the day before, the last time I saw my mother, she was in a hospital room, hooked up to machines, pumping, sounds buzzing, machines buzzing, doctors coming and going, big fuss around her room, people were checking on her all the time. And then the next day, I get a call, I'm at work, and I got the call that your mom died. So I kind of crumpled in a corner for a moment and then got my act together to get to the hospital. And I went to the hospital, and I really was not prepared for what I saw. They pointed me to a room. She says, your mom's in there. And it was a dark room. Nobody was in there. My mom was just laying on the bed. And it was such a contrast to see her all alone by herself after dying. It was after death, nobody cared. And I knew at that moment, I wasn't really involved in spiritual work very deeply at the time. I just knew that it was wrong, and it was devastating to see her in a dark room all by herself. And I knew her energy, she was gone. There was like nobody in the room. And so I sat with that. That was 30 years ago. Then in 2012, the Chevra Kadisha people, Kabul V'Nichum, came to Southern California. And, I'd heard about end-of-life aspects. And I love to study Kabbalah and teach Kabbalah because it connects me so deeply to life. And there's a wonderful mystical book called Sefer Maavor Yabbok that talks about Jewish end-of-life practices and also about the soul and the spirit and how to guide the spirit for to get the spirit where it needs to go, for a good exit strategy, and also to set it up while the person's still alive to maximize to make it a gentle exit and kind of clear the pathway so the souls can go where they need to go. And this book, and I'm going to share a little bit with you from it today, is beyond thrilling. It's just exciting. And, because at the end of life, that's when people may or may not care about Kabbalah besides that. But in end of life, that becomes relevant to everybody. Because that's really where the mystery is. And no one here gets out alive, to quote Jim Morrison. Okay. So what I'd like to do, if you would, Jen, start with the slides, that would be great. Thank you. So today we're going to talk about green burial and the fact that it's very Jewish. And what we're going to do is go back to Jewish basics. We're going to learn a bit from Moed Katan, what the early rabbis how they modeled it, and then we're going to go into specifics to help all of us really make informed decisions when we have to make plans for our loved ones or even for ourselves. Okay, next slide, please. This is a verse from Psalm 91, and it's a practice to invoke the angels. There is, and it's a piece that was highlighted in Sefer Maavor Yabbok. When you read the psalm, they ask you to read this 7 times. So let's invoke the angels to guide us on our way. And I also want to invite you, before I forget, if you have questions or comments, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll address them. Okay, so I want to invite you to sing with me. It says, "This is for their angels are commanded to guard you on all your paths." So you imagine someone is ill or someone had just passed away, and they're in this quasi state, and how meaningful it is to call in and visualize the angels. It's a shifter, or it can be. So they say about half the people really get a sense of spirit with dealing with end of life, and half the people, don't really get a sense of it. So you can also suspend your disbelief if you're one of the people who really questions it, and see how you feel after this. So here's the melody, and I invite you to sing with me. Ki malachav yetza ve'elach lishmarcha b'chol drachecha. Ki malachav yetza ve'elach lishmarcha b'chol drachecha. For their angels are commanded to guard you on all your paths. Ki malachav yetza ve'elach lishmarcha b'chol drachecha. 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 Amen, amen. Next slide, please. There refers to God. So, okay, this is Anita asked the question in the chat box. Who does there refer to? And in Hebrew, it's malachav, which is masculine, God and masculine, which is common in the traditional language. But I want to lift it up beyond the gender to make it, non-binary. And so I chose the word there to use there. Good? Okay, so we're going to be drawing from today and on Tuesday, Sefer Maavor Yabbok, which is the earliest, most respected work on end of life. Maavor Yabbok, it's a reference to Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, our ancestor, crossing the river to, basically that's when he got his name of enlightenment and wrestling with the angel of Esav, his brother. And so it's a metaphor. We're crossing the Jabbok, it's like crossing the big river into the unknown. And it's a metaphor like that. Also, Jabbok, can you see when I point the first letter is Yud? Or maybe you can, thank you. See, Maavor Yabbok, the first, there you go. Yeah, on top there. There's a Yud, that means Yichud. That's first thing you do, it's a process. It's a unification. Bracha, Bet for blessing, and Kuf, Kedusha, holy. So it's like the first thing you do is unite your intention, you do the blessing, and what happens is holiness comes from it. And what was most profound about this particular book, looking at it, there's like pages and pages about things about the soul, and when you look at the liturgy for end of life, it's one contiguous process. There's a page for Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick. Then after that, there are pages for Vidui, a confessional. Then more prayers for when the moment the soul leaves the body. There are actually specific prayers for that. There are 112 prayers in particular, which is the numerology of Yabbok. Yud Bet Kuf of Maavor Yabbok is the name of the book. And so 112 calls on that. So like when you finish the 112 prayers, or like verses, really, the transition could have happened, should have happened. And if it's not done, there's some more prayers that can be added on as needed. It's actually, the word Yabbok is opening a channel. How so? So why don't you, do you want to turn off the video for a second? Yeah. So opening a channel. So if you look at our bodies as the tree of life, there are different points in the middle channel. So Yabbok itself is a numerology of 112. And so it adds up the numerology for Echya, which is Keter, the top crown, that's 21. 65 is for Malchut, that's Adonai, which is the bottom rung, and Tiferet is the center, that's 26. So if you add 21, 26, and 65, it's like we are clearing the passageway to go up high, to go on high. And when you do the reading in the book, they actually tell you when you finish each of these transitions. So it's like highlighting, transforming the Sphirot. We're the Sphirot in our bodies. We're fractals of the divine cosmology, right? Each one of us in our unique perfection. And so we want to open those channels. I see a question. Okay, thank you, Anita. People are them as singular, which is a challenge sometimes, but we're getting used to that also. All right. Jenny, if you'll give us the next slide, please. All right, here's a piece from Sefer Maavor Yabbok. Hutzrach el kol pu'ula gashmit, yitaveh alea davar ne'elam beruchani. So what he's saying here is every physical action is accompanied by a hidden spiritual aspect. V'zehu sod habracha shel ma'aseh matzvot. And this is the secret of making a bracha on a mitzvah. So, you say Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotah v'tzivanu as part of making a bracha. When we do that, we are actually manifesting in a deeper way. That is to accompany the physical action with the spiritual aspects that are the speech. When you actually make the bracha, that is the speech, and the vapor from the mouth that comes in. So that's like bringing in more spiritual aspects. And then we go and do the action of the bracha. So like if we're saying a bracha like Lehadlik Ner Shel Shabbat, if we're going to light Shabbos candles, and we say the prayer, there's the physical, spiritual aspects that are coming in by means of articulating the prayer and having the intention. And then we ground it by lighting the candles. Doing something very physical with it. And in this way, we're like toggling the divine source and inviting presence into our lives. And if we just have everything we do, it's true of it, really, especially mitzvot. And if we keep it in our consciousness, it becomes more tangible in our lives. Okay. Next, please. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about green burial today. I call this piece Green Burial is Very Jewish. And we define green burial as a way for caring for the dead with minimal impact. We really want to conserve the environment. We don't want to add foreign substances to the environment, reduce carbon emissions, take care of workers, and really preserve the natural habitat. I mean, what's happened so often, so frequently, well, here in Southern California for sure, I don't know what it's like where you guys live, is that there are customs that have come into being because the mindset of the funeral industry. So like, for example, one of the customs here, which is really not necessary, people make money on it, so they want to do it, right? So like they put concrete vaults, for example, and they'll put the deceased in the concrete vault. And when that happens, the body is separated from the earth. We're humans, Adam in Hebrew, and Adamah is earth. And the highest thing that can happen to our bodies when our souls are no longer inhabiting them is to go back to the earth. I'm a gardener, I compost, and when I see what my food waste, how it makes beautiful, nourishing compost that grow plants, it's like I know I'm a part of the divine cycle, and it's really exciting, and that's the way to do it, and that's the way that was meant to be, I dare say. The problem with other people would like to do cremation these days. What people don't realize is that burning a body for like 2 hours lets out enormous amounts of carbon into our atmosphere. And so it really is not good for the environment. Additionally, when a body's in the ground, there are these microorganisms that they have a life cycle, and they get to live, they get to do their work, and I don't know, make me no time soon, but when I'm done, I'd really be happy to be compost. I think that's the highest release of the tissue after it's not doing anything else. Next slide, please. So aspects of green burial: no toxic chemicals, biodegradable burial materials. That's like the plain pine box. Or sometimes people are doing things like wicker, which is even more biodegradable than the pine box. No concrete vault. Sometimes what they do here in Southern California to say, okay, well, it is touching the earth. They make a little hole in the bottom of the concrete vault, and it's like a workaround. So they call it, because then they call it kosher. But it's not environmental. And it's kind of like a workaround that doesn't really do what it's intended. Because like sometimes they'll do things, or they'll do no bottom at all, which is better. But still, we don't need that extra matter in the beautiful earth, right? Green is natural and minimally invasive. A natural grave marker. Sometimes people will use stones and as ways of marking it, or they'll use longitude and latitude references as well. but really staying more close to the earth. Okay. So before we go on here, are there any questions and comments before we change the scene and take a look at texts? So we're going to do a little text study next. Oh, Alicia.
I do want to get into the text study to show how long ago our rabbis were already grappling with these problems, but we are limited often by the rules of various cemeteries, and so it's really good if people know where they want to be buried and make those decisions early and do research. So this is what we're doing today, is to just raise our consciousness with what is possible. And that's really important. So let's dive into the text study.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, yeah, and often, I'm just going to, since you talked about cemeteries and what they'll allow, what I've found when I talk to different cemeteries is that they will have rules that they say are state laws, or government regulations, like we have to have concrete vaults. And that's really just not true. It's like people have been told that so often, they believe it. Like even here in Southern California, I was shocked to find out it's not a requirement. And my contact, I work with David Zinner at Kavod V'Nichum a lot, and there's a book that talks about that, and but it's really in the whole United States. Really, it's not an issue. So if someone says you have to have concrete vaults because it is a legal requirement, push back on them, and call me, and we'll get it straightened out. Seriously, because it's invasive and it's just doesn't honor a sacred planet. Okay. Let's go to the next text. So this is about equality in death. These are the early rabbis, Rabban Gamliel. He really made a big example of how to treat people and honor everyone, God willing, in death, because everybody should be honored equally. So the Gemara says the sages taught initially the following baraita. Initially, the visitors to the meals that were after somebody died, that were brought to a house of mourning, the wealthy would bring food in baskets of silver and gold, and the poor would bring baskets of food in peeled willow baskets. And the poor were embarrassed because everyone would see that they were poor. So the sages institute that everyone should bring food in baskets of willow branches in order to honor those that were poor, people that had less money. The sages taught a similar baraita. Initially, they would drink in the house of mourners. The wealthy would do so in cups made of white glass, which I'm thinking must be clear glass, like crystal. And the poor would serve cups in colored glass. And the poor were embarrassed because everyone would see that they were poor. So the sages instituted that all drink in a house of mourning should be served in colored glasses in order to honor those that are impoverished. So why was it established that we use willow baskets? So we want to
so the poor wouldn't be embarrassed.
So the poor wouldn't be embarrassed. We want to honor the poor, and everybody should feel comfortable sharing and being present. It's like, can you imagine, I don't have a pretty cup, so I really just don't want to go because I'm embarrassed to show up. And then that breaks down community, where it's really important that people show up to support families when they're grieving. Thank you. All right, next slide, please. Initially, they would reveal the faces of the wealthy and cover the faces of the poor because their faces of the poor were deformed. Sometimes they didn't have anything to eat, and the poor were embarrassed. As a result, the sages instituted that everybody's face be covered to honor the poor. Right? Do you ever wonder why faces are covered? I mean, I know I did when I was first starting, and it's so this halacha, this custom follows us. And really, in end of life, there really isn't a halacha, it's more customs, and there's a wide variety. So it's really about honoring the dead and kavod hamet, and comforting those that are mourning. Initially, the wealthy would take the deceased out for burial on a dargash, like this fancy couch. And the poor would take their deceased out on a plain bier, like something made out of poles that were just strapped together. And as a result, those that were poor were embarrassed. The sages instituted that everyone should be taken out for burial in a plain bier in order to honor the poor. So the plain pine box, this is where that comes from. We're, in death, we're all alike. Initially, this to be a little different now. They would place incense under the beds of those who died with intestinal disease, because the body emitted an especially unpleasant odor. And those who were alive with intestinal disease, well, they were embarrassed because they knew that when they died, the same thing would happen to them, and it would be marked and everybody would know what was going on. The sages instituted that incense should be placed under everyone to honor those living with intestinal disease. Okay, next page, please. Initially, they would ritually immerse all utensils that had been used by women who had died while menstruating, which had thereby contracted, and they would be nida, so that was that there would be ritual impurity. Well, and we just had this in this week's parasha, Tameh and Tahor. So that's a whole nother topic we could talk about at length. But anyway, because they would immerse the items, due to this, the living women who menstruate were embarrassed because they knew that the same thing would happen when they died. And so they instituted, the sages did, that utensils that would be used by all dying women must be immersed in order to honor the living menstruating women. So, and this custom also continues. At first, they would ritually immerse all utensils that had been used by Zavim, and that's a man suffering from venereal discharge, and when they died, and then as a result, because the utensils had thereby contracted ritual impurity. And as a result, the living Zavim were embarrassed. So the sages instituted that the utensils, things that they used, that had been used by any man, must be immersed to honor those living Zavim. Initially, taking the dead out for burial was much more difficult for the relatives than even the death itself. So much so that the relatives would sometimes abandon the corpse and run away because it was so expensive. It was such a deal to do this, so they didn't feel they could do it right. Until Rabban and Gamliel, a wealthy, well-respected man who's quoted a lot to this day, came and acted like he didn't take himself too seriously. He left instructions that he be taken out for burial in linen garments, and the people followed his example, and they had themselves also taken out for burial in linen garments. And so Rav Papa says, and nowadays everyone follows the practice of taking the dead out for burial, even in plain hemp garments. that are really inexpensive that cost a dinar.
Let's have a moment here, because we're looking at Talmudic commentaries on the times, and we have learned even so far that we're honoring the dead body. We're honoring the people who are surrounding and there and who are alive, so they too should not be shamed. And now we're honoring the mourners, because they shouldn't have to go to some expense, and it should be possible for each person to honor their dead. We have shrouds that are now, you don't have to do your own. There are Jewish shrouds that are available and that are very plain cotton garments with the pants and the top and the covering. And those of us who have been trained with tahara, with purification, it's so amazing to see that what we're looking at today is based on the text that you're bringing us. And by the way, I sent out these texts that are a little bit more clear as documents, so you can download those yourselves and have a clear picture of them, because I know that here in the recording it's a little bit fuzzy.
It is fuzzy to see them.
We will get later to the discussion that Rosemary posed about Reform Judaism and cremation. We're going to talk about first traditional Jewish thought, how it plays out today, and we're going to talk about something called Americana. Like, what is it you've seen around here? What have you experienced in your own family, and how does that compare? So let's hold on to those really good questions till later.
Okay. So why was it customary? Why do they cover everybody's face when they die then? Like, to honor those whose face may have been deformed or as a result. And what's the most important thing? That it's really pulling out the community and having all people feel comfortable and feel seen and be able to participate. When their own people, when their own beloveds die, but also to show up and say, I'm going to bring you some food for your Shiva. Here it is. And to have it be a respected, honored, to have it be received and not to be embarrassed. So people shouldn't feel embarrassed to call on someone that's grieving. So he did something really smart, that Rabban Gamliel. So we remember him to this day. Okay, Jenny, could you, next slide, please? So this is one of the first pieces that I read in Sefer Maavor Yabbok that it just really touched my soul. And so I wanted to share it with you. It's also because a bedside vigil, is it Jewish? Have I seen it in places? And to really see it in a mystical text from, I want to say 1629 is, it was really comforting. So it says here, the custom, haminhag lesalek hakravim mecheder hagoseset, the custom of separating the relatives from the room of the person that's in the throes of passing away, hu dafka shelo letzara b'harmot kolam. It's done specifically not so you don't add stress to the person that's dying by having some of the relatives scream and make noise. Aval, however, im hayu yacholim la'amod amdam below dilui kol, ein sapek sheyesh ta'anug l'nifteret b'hayot kroveha chayim sham. But if they're able to stand their ground without raising their voice, there is no doubt that there is pleasure, great pleasure to the one who's passing away by having their living relatives near them. Okay. Right, and that just is so comforting. Okay. Next slide. I guess I would also say, I know a lot of people do cremation, and Well, I guess Alicia will probably talk about that maybe more afterwards. But really, what the focus here is on green burial, and so my point also was that cremation is not green, although a lot of people do it. So that's also why I'm here to kind of to talk about these issues and help people make. Everybody's going to make their own decision, but to help you make decisions that are really meaningful to you and your families. Question here is, how do we make informed decisions? There's at least 3 aspects that we can concern ourselves with. Right? There's Jewish tradition. There is Americana tradition, and then there's a green burial tradition. And everyone has like a little different orientation, and there's a lot of overlap between them. I guess what's interesting, what I thought was really interesting, is that the Americana tradition came about when Abraham, you can turn the slide off for the moment. Abraham Lincoln was the first person to be embalmed. And is that far out? Embalming is very much the Americana tradition. And it was very important that after he was assassinated, that he be viewed. People wanted to see him. They missed him. He was their president. And so he was the first person to be embalmed and put on a choo-choo train, to go back home after he was killed. So after, of course, the president was embalmed, everybody else wanted to do it. And it became really popular as a result. And embalming, it's like the opposite of green burial, right? Embalming involves putting a bunch of chemicals in the body. It's about, the way I see it, really, it's like it's external. It's about the external beauty, and it's comforting for people to see them. It's about the comforting of the relatives, as opposed to kavod hamet, honoring the deceased. It's like the person died. Let them alone. Let them rest in peace, and go back to the earth. It's a really different orientation. It's more pnimiut, the inner aspects, when you allow the deceased to be and be in the natural state, as opposed to pumping them up full of chemicals so that the relatives feel comforted by seeing them. So first, in Jewish practice, it's kavod hamet, right? We honor the deceased. We can honor the deceased by burying them as quickly as possible. When somebody dies, you tend to them as quickly as possible. That's the first priority. And also in the States, a lot of times people will wait for, someone can't come back for another week. So the person, what happens practically is they end up, the corpse, the meta or the mate ends up in a refrigerator. There's also a value in Jewish tradition about, like when somebody dies, you don't leave them alone. There's Shmira. And you guys do that? Yeah, it's really, so it's and that's what my mom was missing. I told you the story earlier, it was just, I didn't know that was a custom at the time, but I knew it was missing. She shouldn't have been left alone at that key time. And so that's also another, when you have quick burial, you don't need refrigeration. Shmira isn't really long. And it really, when we're conscious of these things and kind of make that happen, it makes for a much easier, death is hard anyway, but it does, there's some comfort in taking the steps and making it happen in that way. Alicia.
You're in aninut, there's this stage between when someone you love dies and they're buried, and you're in this state of, there's a word for it in Hebrew, I don't even know what it is in English, aninut. So you're neither here nor there, and you're kind of hovering, just like the soul is hovering of the person, we believe. And that's why you shouldn't wait too long. And sometimes it's unavoidable, but it causes great stress for the mourners, for the mourners. And there's this thing about viewing. Now, Abraham Lincoln, people were passing by, and viewing, but that's not something that we do. Although they do have to we do have to identify the body, make sure that it's the right person, but that's it. We don't do a viewing, we don't do open casket. That is absolutely not according to Jewish custom. We don't put makeup on, none of that. That would be, I don't even know if that's American, but that's just not how we do.
That's an Americana, I guess I would call that.
Anita, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
Yeah, with regard to the open versus the closed caskets, with my mom and my brother, they were obviously both closed caskets. When my dad died, he was 49, 1962. And I am grateful that we had an open casket, because I was able to see him and really say bye and see him in his last role. He was an actor and singer. And so seeing him laid out in the kittel with his yarmulke, the white yarmulke, it looked like he was playing the role of a Gohengai Doll, or at least a Kohen. And I was really grateful. And I am, all these years later, really grateful I was able to that we had the open casket for him.
This was your father? Or?
Yeah.
Also, when it's family, I think the family kind of can get like a different viewing to identify, and I would support that. But if the person wasn't, I don't know what, and I'm also going to say what I know now. If I would have buried my parents differently, knowing what I know today. So like, I'm not here to say anybody did it wrong, because like I did it wrong. Bless me, it's like, so I'm here to tell you what I've learned and how I would do it now, knowing what I know today. So just to be really clear, there are things that like when my mom died, they wanted to put these eye things on. I mean, I don't even know what they are. I was distraught. The guy at the funeral was home, well, what, should I do it or not? They asked me. He's like, well, people do it. It's ka-ching. It's another however much money for them. And when I look back on it, what I know now is that she didn't need it where she was going. It was external. And I hear you about having comfort. It's also, there's a tradition in the United States, and most of us grew up in the United States, with these kinds of these things being normal. So, and I'm here just to show you what the tradition says. So there's no judgment at the same time.
Right. You want to say something about clothing versus a shroud, or the very simple cotton clothing versus someone picking an outfit for the dead person?
Yeah, actually, it's on my list of things, so I should probably maybe do that. But there is the idea of the Gohengai Doll. Anita, when you said that, so you studied some of this before. You've read some of the commentary about being dressed as the Gohengai Doll, as the high priest. Is that right? Yeah. Really, it's just like that. The fact that it's simple, and not to. Also, there are different ones that feel different kinds of tachrichim that feel different. So I know that I've touched some that, as in doing tahara, that, God, it seems like it would be scratchy. I guess the person doesn't matter, but there's some that are nice and they feel nice, and they're not very expensive. So not all tachrichim are the same.
Tachrichim is shroud. Is the English word shroud, which doesn't make sense because it's really an outfit. There are pants, there's a top, there's a kind of a jacket, and there's a head covering. So it's many different pieces, and it comes in a box, one for men, one for women, kind of one size fits all. So when Rabbi Tmima says tachrichim, that's translated as shroud, but the Jewish thing is, it's not a shroud. It's not like just a sheet. It's the whole outfit. And tahara is the purification process, which we will be talking about.
Yes.
Raya Key had her hand up.
Yeah, two thoughts. One, for me, well, the way my parents did it, it was you got to see the face and everything. But a friend of mine died when I was in college, and I didn't find out. It was during the summer. I found out months later. I saw like a 2-sentence newspaper clipping on a bulletin board a friend told me about. And it wasn't until I found her grave, which took some doing, it was like many hours from where I was, that there was some closure for me. And for me, emotionally, I know when my mom died, I didn't know about Shamir, but I did it, except I decided I didn't need to see she was in the hospital. I didn't need to see them washing her. I decided to leave the room for that, but I goes right outside, went right, in, and they had her in this bag, but I made them unzip the bag. It's like I wanted clarity that the body I was watching was my mom's, and there was just that, necessity for me. But the other thing, it's like I did not call the nurses immediately when she died, because the teaching I had gotten shamanically from a native teacher was exactly what Alicia was talking about this in-between state of hovering. And not that everybody does that. I think some people are maybe, I'm out here, but because of that possibility, and because there are even cases where people come back to life when people think they've died, their tradition is not to move the body for at least 24 hours, preferably 3 days. And I wonder if there's anything about that in Judaism.
That's really interesting. What I've seen is when right after the moment of death, what tends to happen is they take the body and they put it on the earth traditionally. And I saw when Reb Zalman, our teacher, passed away, that's what they did with his body. And they leave it on the floor with someone guarding, until the time of burial. So I guess, which happens pretty quickly. That's actually that's a good question. I've not heard of anybody doing that, waiting like after the pronouncement. I think when it's pronounced dead, they figure that the death has really happened. So I know my understanding is that when you know someone's dead, it honors them to put them in the earth. But God forbid you don't want to do it when they're still alive. That would be the worst thing. Anything else? Yeah, have you known that to happen? Where people, it's pretty rare, but I guess it does happen. Everything does.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but not anybody I know personally.
Thank God, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then let's move forward, and and the liminal state, like when you're in the Tahara room, getting ready to do a Tahara, who's in the room? Right, it's the Tahara team, whoever's there to keep Tahara, maybe someone for the mortuary, and the neshama of the person is usually around. I mean, the person's like hovering, their soul is, and about half the people I always get a strong sense of it personally. That's just my orientation. And there's some people who don't get a sense of it, but they do the work. They're committed to the work because they want to serve it. So people work in this area for all kinds of reasons. But I think it's really, but just to really have the sense of the soul. And and the refrigerator is common, and if we can minimize the time in between, it honors the person, the person that's deceased as well. Okay, Jenny, if we could do the next sheet. So we're going to look at the intentions and then kind of look at it through a lens, a Jewish lens, an ecological lens, which is a green burial lens, and Americana lens. So quick burial, quicker for all concerned, right? Because Jewish tradition does support that. It honors the deceased, as I said here before. And it really helps to pre-plan, to get paperwork in. A lot of times it's really hard to even have it be the next day or within a couple days without I guess when you're local, you probably know people in the, the doctors and in the mortuary to make sure that the paperwork gets done, because we live in a society where we need to have paperwork. Also, as I mentioned before, if we do creek burial, it minimizes the need for refrigeration. Optimally, I have a dream, and that would be like not to be refrigerated. Also, when I've seen people do Shmira, sometimes they'll do Shmira for someone that's in a refrigerator, and it may go on for a long period of time, and the person's like in this mortuary, but they don't really get to sit with the person, and it does change the dynamic. I think like a short, sweet Shmira is juicier, or can be juicier. Care of the mate. Thank you. Jewish tradition calls for simple, elegant burial, minimalism, and equality in death, like we just read from the Moed Katan piece. Final viewing. So it's not the custom in Judaism. Now, if someone's the family to identify the body, yes. Or if someone wants to see the body, that's part of the family. That's personal decision, and I guess people would support that. Final viewing is okay ecologically, and it's definitely the key part of the Americana piece, where a lot of work is done to have a pleasant final viewing, right? And this is where we talked about the Civil War and Lincoln, and he was the first one. So embalming is definitely not Jewish, and it's definitely not ecological, and it's definitely Americana because of Honest Abe, or how they, not because of him, but how they treated him. So setting the face, this is what I did with my mom. Sorry, Mom, I love you. And I can't fix it, but I can tell other people about it. So we don't set the face in Jewish tradition. And the other thing that was mind-blowing also is that I went at a Jewish cemetery, funeral home. You'd think they would know these rules, but they don't, and it's not their job to educate you about them. So that's why it's really important to do, like this workshop is a way to get educated about it, but really to have your own sources to make decisions. Because like they really encouraged me at the cemetery.
What does that mean, Shmima? What is setting the face?
They put some things, they said something with the eyes, so they stay open, so the face looks nice. And it's like instead, and the bottom line is that it gets in the way of the body's natural process. And so anything that gets in the way of the natural process or adds more plastic to the earth is not green, is not useful. So I'm here to talk really about green, and Jewish burial tends to be very green in its essence. But then there have been some workarounds that we're going to talk about it's like people like bend the halacha, bend the rules, and then it makes it not so green. So I want to talk about that a bit. So does that make sense about setting the face? Okay. Makeup. So makeup is not a Jewish practice, and it's not ecological because it's adding more stuff into the earth, and it's very key in the Americana way. And very, very, very key. Street clothes, no, not ecological, because it's more junk in the earth. It's not Jewish, because people want to be like that high priest. And really just the white shroud to be simple. I come from the earth, I go back to the earth. Adam goes back to Adamah, where Adamah means earth. And I find that's really simple and profound. So we have tachrichim, which are natural fibers. So it's very Jewish. It's very ecological. And Americana, that's, you could do it, but it's not part of it. But in Americana, they make you look like you're still alive, or make the person look like they're still alive. Thank you. Now about the burial plot. Concrete vault, it's really common here in Southern California, and you have to really... Is that common there where you are? Also in Sedona? Bless you. You're really lucky. It's definitely not good, not for green, excuse me. And the concrete vac, it's really about keeping the cemetery park looking like a park, as opposed, because like also it can help from the sinking in. They want it to look like a park-like structure, a park-like place. So, they put these reinforcements in. But the ecological way is the green way is just to allow the sinking to happen, allow the earth to have her own irregularities, let the earth, release, burp a little bit if that's what she does, but just to let her be instead of like holding her into a certain place.
So I did a funeral on Thursday at Mount Sinai in Los Angeles for a family I've known since the 80s. And I was really surprised to see, because I hadn't been in LA for a while, that they had a concrete vault around the plain pine box. And I was thinking,
Oi.
what? What's the point? But I didn't say anything. Obviously, that's what they do there, and all the grass was very even, and all the stones there's nothing vertical. Everything is for the look of the grass. So everything is all even. But it occurred to me at the time. I was thinking, oh, why do they have a concrete vault? I hadn't known about that. So that you're bringing it up is important. And it's good to have these conversations before, not when you're in mourning, not when you're distressed and distraught and you can't even think. And the fact that we're talking about it now is really important. So here in Sedona, the cemetery looks like kind of a Mexican garden. I mean, it's this way and that way, and stones and angels, and
Nice.
I've done a lot of burials there of Jewish people, but there's not a Jewish section. Although where I got the plot for Yitzhak and me, may we not use it for many years, and where my mom is, and a bench and everything. It's so sweet. It's just a sweet little garden place, and other people that I know have, I've done those burials near us, and there are other people who have already bought their plots. But it's a very sweet place to go. And those of you who know Chaya Miriam, it was her yard site this week, and so I visited her grave and put a stone on for all of us. She was the president of our women's group, of our women's chavurah for many years. And the idea of visiting and taking care of a space, it's somehow honoring the memory of a person, and it feels good inside for us when we visit. And so it starts in the room of the tahara that you were describing, the purification process, which used to be done in a person's home, but now it's done at the mortuary, and there's a special room where we do it. And as you said, the neshama, the spirit, feels like it's there in the room, and so we go in and we talk to the person. We apologize for any indignity and say we're doing this with the utmost respect. And as we wash the body and all the different forms of it and the prayers that we do, which I know you'll talk about, there's a sense that we're in conversation and in relation with the person. Anita, you had a question?
Yeah, this kind of brings up the issue of organ donation. Many, many years ago, when I first met Label Wolf, who's Hasidic and Orthodox, right? And I asked him about that, and he said exactly what you said about the soul needing time to separate from the body. However, he said, if you can keep another life alive, another person alive, then you go ahead and do that. And I expect that, that's done sufficiently quickly so that the body then, has time for a quick burial.
Right. Pikuach nefesh and the idea of saving a life is the highest value. And so if somebody wants to donate an organ, according to Jewish tradition, we can do that. That wasn't in ancient times because you couldn't do it then. So we had to look at the precedent, and we had to have a responsa, which is a contemporary answer, but it's based on earlier teachings, and it is allowed. It is definitely allowed. And
the Orthodox are doing it these days. It is a big mitzvah. Mm-hmm. So that's saving the life above everything else. Okay. People often use the kittel. It's like for marriage, for Yom Kippur, for burial. That would be natural. It's also fabric, you know. It's like all of a sudden, you know, we know what natural fabrics are, and that's really what we'd want to put back into the earth. And it's not something plastic, but something like cotton, linen, natural. Jenny, can you put the slide back up? So concrete vault, no, we don't. That's not green. It's not really Jewish. It's Americana for the park, right? Now, what people are doing is putting a hole in the bottom of the concrete vault, saying, okay, well, now the body can go into the earth. And so I love Judaism, I love Jewish practice, and this kind of thing really makes me angry because it's like a workaround that isn't really the thing that it's supposed to be. You know, people say it's kosher, and they do it, but I think it's a bad idea. Like the little hole is not the same as putting a body into the earth, Adam to Adamah. And they call it halachic. So is it ecological? No. And it's not relevant to Americana. So, but what it is, it's kind of like when you put the hole in the bottom of it, it's like Americana meeting Jewish practice in a odd way, in a way that doesn't hold the bigger intention. So directly in earth is definitely Jewish. Like even if you're not in it can be like Reb Zalman was just in a shroud buried in the earth. And like if I got to pick how I would be buried, no time soon, that would be what I would want. Just like to have the least amount of separation as possible. Right, so it's also very ecological, and it's not typically done in Americana. Right, most Adam to Adamah. I mean, I think it's so simple. Like we're earthlings. We're part of, you know, Adam. We're humanoids, and that really, it's like putting us back to the great Earth Mother, like to rest. Next slide, please.
I can make this a little bit larger too. Let's see here. Your slides are so pretty. I hate to take everything else around them off, but this is the way that you can see the type the largest.
That's what we're doing then. But okay. And thank you for looking at them. I have a lot of circular things on the slides because it's the divine feminine and really cultivating that as a part of the aspect. I feel like putting the body back in the earth also is an aspect of cultivating. It's like the passive divine feminine, letting the receptivity manifest and to be receptive. So burial transport, metal casket is definitely not Jewish. Doesn't melt and doesn't dissolve into the earth. It's not ecological, and it's very American. Right? There was a value. It's like, oh, you know, and you know, when people go to bury their beloveds, often people aren't planning, and this is a time of really great vulnerability. And it's like, oh, you know, I loved Uncle Sal so much. I'm going to show him. I'm going to get him the biggest coffin ever, and he's going to know he was so loved. And like, that's just, it's not so useful. Show him when he's alive. But for money, it's much better spent to feed the sick, start a school, start an endowment in honor of the person, rather than, you know, dressing them up and getting a big ornate casket and big expensive shrouds. Yeah, some places have really expensive shrouds for that matter. But really the simplicity, you know, and the same thing pretty much with a varnished casket. You don't need, the finishing is not good for the earth, and it's not Jewish, it's not ecological, it's very, it's like the outward appearance. So like Judaism focuses on the inner activity, the inner cultivation, and is less concerned with the way it looks from the outside, where the Americana perspective is like, you know, oh, it's a gorgeous casket, you know, we're showing him so much or her so much honor, which is not how we, you know, which is not the priority. Give charity, support life, feed the hungry. That's what the money is good for. The money's for the living. The dead, they can't use it where they're going now. Plain pine box, it's very Jewish, definitely ecological, not so American. That's not what's done in Americana so much. Biodegradable with no finish, so it goes into the earth. It could be wicker, it can be plain pine box, but something that's of the earth. And same thing with the shroud, something biodegradable, natural fabric. So it's Jewish, it's ecological, and it's, you know, it's not showy and external, so which is the Americana way. And, you know, and I can really understand people wanting to see the beloveds and before they die, before they go into the earth, before they're buried. And I can have compassion for that, you know, and still hold that it's not honoring the earth, not honoring, and it doesn't maximally honor the deceased process. It's really honoring the mourners and making people feel comfortable as the priority. Shmira, sitting with the deceased after death, before burial. There we are. Thank you, Jenny. So Maavor Yabbok, it shows. So it's very Jewish, and it's nothing not ecological about it. And I'm sure Americana folks do it some of the time too. The soul is present after death. You know, some say that it hovers around the body. And during Shmira, you can do some like interesting things. Sometimes, like talking to the deceased and saying, you know, and even explaining the process of what's going on, or you can get a sense of what maybe needs to be said or what's on your heart to share with the deceased, or learn about the process. I mean, people often read Tehillim, Psalms, but it doesn't have to be just Psalms. It can be whatever is relevant and respectful. Some communities have a Shmira like case where they have different books on end of life, different books of Psalms, different things to read to, I want to say, to entertain the deceased and also the person doing Shmira, to kind of hold that together.
Tamima, when Savina Tubal of blessed memory passed away, she was the co-leader of Sarah's Tent back in LA. I signed up for a 2-hour stretch for Shmira, and she was there in her outfit that she had. She wanted a kittel that was special for her, and she was there, and we spoke to her, and we just took turns until the burial, and we did as much as we could because at night there could be nobody there. We did it kind of long distance, but it was a very moving experience to have that time saying what she meant to me, and then reading, and then singing, and it was very holy, very sacred, quite an experience to do that.
Yeah, and also since COVID started, and it's been difficult to actually do physical Shmiras being with the body, people are doing virtual Shmiras and signing up and reading Psalms, taking you know, also like 2-hour segment or 2-hour segments. So even if for some reason you can't be with the person, you can always send them blessings in this way. So that's come up a lot with COVID.
Raya Key raised her hand.
Yeah. Question. Does Judaism have, or mystical Judaism, something comparable to like the Tibetan Book of the Dead concept of a way of guiding the soul after death, or during that transition process?
That's what Rabbi Tamima was talking about, the Maavor Yabbok, the crossing the Jabbok River. So maybe you want to say more about that.
Yeah, that's the book that I've been referencing, and we're going to look at it more on Tuesday. But that is like the go-to book for Jewish end of life. It's very deep Kabbalah. So most people, what I've noticed since I've been working in this area, is people will reference it, but then a lot of like the liturgy that was in it originally, it's morphed over the years what you find in Tahara rooms. So there's like a real value of looking back at the mystical book, and this, you know, this is what I do to really get a sense of what the people, like the people that wrote this and wrote the intentions out first, what was important to them and what they want, how they wanted to transmit it. And so for sure, it's Sefer Maavor Yabbok, which is, it is the book that where Kabbalah really hits, it becomes really relevant. I think it's always relevant, but it becomes relevant for more people because it deals with end of life. And it's very deep on the soul and also like the different parts of the body when you wash it, the different parts of knowing, different kinds of awareness in different parts of the body, which I'm going to cover next. I guess one tidbit just to give a taste, because I think it's really interesting. It's like the hairs on the head, they say that there are, what is it, like, I know, like many, many millions, and that each hair on the head has... Kadosh is holy in Hebrew. It has a gematria of 410. And so it says that there's 410 like little threads from each hair piece. And each of those hair pieces has another 410 more threads that go up to the heavens. And then those 410, that second set, moves into 720 more transformers, is the word that they use, that connects to the tree of life, if we're familiar with the tree of life. 20 go to the uppers, Keter Chochma Da'at, I think it was, Chochma being a dot, and the other 700 go to the lower 7 Sirot. And in this way, each of us I think this is thrilling, is connected to the source of life through energetically, and that's just one example. So I find it interesting and compelling, and the somatic aspect is also really exciting. So is that the kind of thing you're looking for, Ria? Did I say your name right?
Raya.
Raya.
Yeah. It's maybe not exactly. I was talking about the concept, and I don't know too much about the Tibetan, or I think the Egyptians also have a Book of the Dead. But their concept, from what I think I remember, is like there's this path that
The Bardo.
That if you can get on it, you can skip the purgatory types of places and the hell types of realms, and be guided into the light, essentially.
There's a practice. Actually, I wasn't going to bring it to this group, but maybe we should. We've done this before, Alicia. Nefilata Prime. It's a prostration practice, and I usually bring it out around for Yom Kippur because that's what people. That's what actually Jews. There's practices every except for Shabbos and holidays of actually doing the prostration. But there's this one piece that has a kavanah, a list of intentions while you're on your face, and the last one is, and like if you're blessed to die at this moment, you're going to go unobstructed. This is what you're asking for. And that wasn't from Sefer Maavor Yabbok, but it's from the Arizal's writings, and I'll see if I can bring a copy of that. Maybe we'll share, because what your question is, how do I go how do I go direct when I go?
Well,
No time soon.
or how do I was asking, how do I guide another soul to do that?
Right.
In the dying process and right after.
Well, and it's interesting because it's also a practice that we can do every day. Like if you're looking at a traditional prayer service, every day we say the Amida, the standing prayer, and then there's Tachanun, it's like the confessional part. People go like this, or some people fall on the floor and actually prostrate, which is ways to do that. And so this would be part of the prostration practice at the end. When you're in that liminal state, we were all talking about, that's when you're alive, or one of the times to cultivate that liminal state while you're alive. Because after the Amida, it's like you've been talking to God and you're already kind of there. And so then this practice, Gewalt, is just like, changes the scene. I want to say every time, but it's really impactful. So maybe we'll make some changes for what I'm going to present next Tuesday, or at least make it available. Yeah, when you say guide someone else, it's like if we all do it, and if you're in a community and you all do it together, well, then we just know what to do. And like, how amazing would that be? Like to make just an easy, I don't know, maybe exit is never easy, but just to have it be part of the dynamic, the floor.
And we'll also talk Tuesday about how you talk to someone who is dying, and that would be part of that guidance, giving them permission to leave and that things will be okay, and that they'll be, saying Psalm 23, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I mean, to say that to someone, oh, that's so comforting. I'll be guided. I'll be protected. Well, why don't we finish, because we only have about 10 more minutes. So let's go back to the slide.
Okay.
Linda Waddell still has something.
A much less deep question, but when you're talking about environmental and green, what about bearing something meaningful to the person with them, something that they might have cherished, a book or something like that? Does that go against being green, or?
Well, I would ask, what's the book made out of? If we want to really, I mean, so people do these things because it's meaningful, and it's, there's definitely part of the custom. Like one person that I did a tahara on it, which was challenging, is like the mom, before she died, she got her nails done because she wasn't going to go into the earth without her nails. God bless her. Very Americana, very real. Kacha. That's just, Yes. And she got her nails done, and then she died, and that was, and she was going in the earth with, and like I wasn't the Rosh, I wasn't gonna get in the way of that, because it was just such a part of what, of what they, of what their reality was. Having said that, if they were educated beforehand, and if it wasn't just a moment of death, I would have said, we should take the nail polish off. So there's like an attachment to it. So it's not really green unless it's like unless it's a book that's got no glue in it, and then unless it is, and maybe like there's things that you can give that are like very earthy to okay. And you know what? If it's a book that the person that's deceased lived, give it to the grandchild. Give it to somebody that would cherish it and think of them lovingly whenever they had that book. That person, because where that person's going, they don't really need it.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. And people do things, and not everything's rational in death. So I'm laying out suggestions, and so it's food for thought. It doesn't. So it's not. So anyhow, that's the answer to your question. How about that? Should we go back to the slide, Jenny? Sitting with the deceased, we talked about washing after the transition. Jewish tradition, we do tahara, which is effectively, energetically, it's like making the person, it kind of lifts the person up to a tzaddik level, to being, and then when someone at tzaddik dies, it's like an easier progression. So that's one of the blessings in the way tradition holds the ritual washing of the deceased, of the meta or the mate. And sacred washing rituals are done by many, many traditions. Okay, and then tahara. So there's a washing. Oh, there's a washing after the transition, and then the tahara ritual, which is very prayerful. Who here has done tahara? Anita, Alicia. It's really amazing holy work where we do get a chance to talk to the deceased. There's a practice of first it's like the final mikveh, right? So first, before mikveh, we get clean and we cleaned ourselves up. So you take a shower and get all cleaned. We clean behind the nails, and then after that, that's when the water is poured, and it's like the final mikveh, elevating, with the intention of elevating the deceased.
And I want to add that, in case you've never seen it, the body is never exposed, it's never naked. So you do a part and you cover, and a part and you cover. So the whole thing is just incredibly modest and respectful.
Yes. and you don't pass anything over the head either. So really just, it's very special and it's very powerful. So we just started with Rosh Chodesh Nisan. We just had the month of Nisan was just started. That was yesterday, Shabbos. And so I think it's exciting because if you look at this little circle here, this is the year. This is the Jewish year, but it's also the astrological year. And Nisan is the top and center because it's beginning of the year for the Jewish year. It's when the Jews became a people. And so I think it's just exciting to see. I know I'm nerdy about stuff like this. So to see that Nisan, to know we just started a new year, a new cycle is exciting. And I put this here because we're talking about stages and time stages of mourning. So as Rabbi Elisha mentioned, when you hear about the death before the burial, it's the sense, it's called aninut, which is, it's like this, it's an ani is like being impoverished. So like this, it's the people don't pray. People that halachically usually do pray, like 3 times a day, they don't have to. No one has to do anything, but really tend to the body. It's really also that important to make sure that the burial can happen. Then after the burial happens, then we start the process of Shiva, which means 7, begins. It's a 7-day period. Often people come to the house like once or twice a day to do prayers, to get together, to bring food to the mourners. What's also in American Shivas, often the people that are doing the mourning, it's like the custom is them for the feed everybody, which just is not the way it was done in the old times. And probably it's like these people that are mourning, they should be supported by community because they're going through a really big, hard transition. So, there's a lot of room to improve on the way things are done in the United States typically. And this is one, and maybe you're different in your community, but this is one thing that I hold that would be, let me bring food to the Shiva Minyan. Let me bring you food. And and you can just sit and mourn and do what you need to do your process. That's a real kindness. Then there's Sloshim, which is 30 days after the morning. Sloshim, Shiva means 7. So that's really easy to remember the time. Also in Shiva, they say the first 3 days are a little more intense than the last 4 days. And then Sloshim is a 30-day period. Usually people get together, they may do a memorial or they break bread or something to honor the shift. And it's also like tracking the release of the soul moving higher. And after 11 months, there's a thought that if someone's in Gehenna, someone isn't like perfect and they spend time. And the way Reb Zalman would talk about Gehenna would be like, it'd be like the regret we have for things that we didn't do when we had a body. We have our consciousness still, but we don't have the physicality to do mitzvot, to do good things. So there's like times of regret. That's how I understand Gehenna, which is like the Jewish version of, it starts with an H, but it's not really the same thing. But after that, there's like a purification that happens. And, they say someone's really evil, it's 12 months. But knowing that we love is really evil, so we hold it for 11 months and then put the placard in and witness that ascension. And then every year we remember the people on their yortzeit, on the death anniversary.
Right. Sometimes that memorial stone, when it's placed, we call it an unveiling, and it's much more intimate than the big funeral that was almost a year before. And maybe the closest family comes and we unveil the stone and we talk about all the different symbols that are on it and the dates and the name. And it's a very tender moment. It's very sweet. So we're at our time. We want to honor the ending time, but we want to really thank you, Rabbi Tamima.
I have one more slide. I thought we were just going to.
Yes. So I want to say, do you have any final thoughts to leave us with?
So I hope you'll sing with me. Ki malachav yitzad elach lishmarcha b'chol drachecha Ki malachav yetzav elach lishmarcha b'chol drachecha. Ki malachav yitzav elach lishmarcha b'chol drachecha.